o'clock. I'm Stuart Fischman. This is the Web Yeshiva. And we're going to talk about why we do what we do. So what do we do? A lot of times we eat. And it's about Jewish cooking, Jewish traditional foods. You go to Amazon, there are over 3,000 results for the Jewish cookbook. Over 3,000. Okay? So food is it's important. Every culture has its own food, and we have our traditional foods. And traditional, without getting into that, we're kind of recording that Fiddle on the Roof song, tradition. Yeah, but traditions are important. The Ramah says this in Hilchos Purim. Something that we do is on Purim, and when they read Megillah Esther and Shul, people bang. Now, I happen to live in a frat, and there's some people who are a little impatient. Sometimes I'm one of those impatient people, and I go to a no banging minyan. And we get out of shul 10 minutes earlier. But the Ramah likes this minhag. This is what Ramah says about minhagim in general. And it's something we have to keep in mind. Okay. Od kasusha nagu hatinokas otos hamal eitzim avanim of shem hamen alein. Little kids, now we have noisemakers. All these kids would write Haman's name on two pieces of wood and slam them together. That's Timchat Zech Amalek. And that's, he quotes from the Abu Dram, who's Spanish. And from the minhag of banging two pieces of wood, Haman's name, another minhag grew out of that people would bang during Megillah reading when Haman's name was read. And Ramah says, "En lavatel shum minhag lo. You should not nullify nor mock any minhag. Ki lo lechinam hukba'u. They're not there for no reason. There's a reason. We do things for a reason. We don't do anything without a reason. Ramah says, if all the Jews are doing it, there must be a very good reason for it. Even if you don't know the reason, don't mock it. Now, something that I wanted to talk about today is a lot of people eat is cholent on Shabbos. This is Google images of cholent. So you got all these websites for cholent. BBC Good Food. Somebody called Tori Avery, who doesn't even sound Jewish. Jamie Geller, my wife says that she's a popular website on cooking. Together Plan, the Wall Street Journal, Sylvie's Chulent, the New York Times, which lately has not been a friend of the Jewish people, as far as I'm concerned. They also have an article about cholent. All sorts of people have recipes for cholent. It's important to eat. Apparently, it's something that Jews do. And I don't want anyone to accuse me of not appreciating Sephardic culture. So there's also a Chamin website. Chamin, what Ashkenazi Jews call cholent, Sephardim call Chamin. And this is from someone else's website. I don't remember who. Apparently, they ship. They'll send you a Chamin for $75. I don't know how it gets to you, but anyway, I don't know who they are. But Chamin is a warmly spiced overnight stew that survived centuries of history and migration, which is cholent for Ashkenazim. I used to make it with friends as a weekend brunch, with pasel malawach or jachnun, which is a Yemenite bread, possibly a nap afterwards. Versions will vary from personal tradition, but the one below has been my go-to for years. Now, for Sephardi, he also eats kishka, which is very, broad-minded of him. Because obviously kishka is classically Ashkenazi. So he puts kishka in his chamin, which is nice. Okay. So you have to have a warm meal on Shabbat morning. And that's really, really important. There's even a book on Wikipedia, which I found. It's a children's book on cholent. This is not a cholent, okay? Amira loves cholent and is eager to share her nana's recipe in the best cholent competition down under. Apparently, she's Australian. Amira and Nana throw garlic and ginger into their pot. This is not a cholent, someone says. Everyone gasps. When Nana takes out a needle and thread, stitches the stuffed chicken, and adds eggs to the stew. This is not a cholent, the crowd says. Amira holds Nana's hand hard and shuts her eyes when the judges come. This is not a cholent, the judges say, but it is delicious. What is it? This is a cholent, Amira says. It's an Iraqi stew that Nana and I make every Friday. So apparently Amira and her Nana are Sephardim who were trapped in an Ashkenazi ghetto, and she has to explain to these people that what Ashkenazim think is cholent and what Sephardim view as cholent may be two different things, but we're all one people. Okay, so why is it important to eat cholent? So Wikipedia writes about cholent, and also, where's my little friend here? Let me just open up a file. One moment, please. Let's open up one more file to open. I thought I opened it, but I guess I didn't. You know what? I don't know. Should we show it? There. Anyway, Jamie Geller, who we saw is features prominently in many kosher sites. Some cholent facts. Cholent was invented to prove that Jews could and should eat hot food on Shabbos, even though cooking on Shabbos isn't allowed. Really? The challenge came from a sect called Karaites who insisted the Shabbos laws meant that we must literally eat cold food. Some brilliant person, probably a Geller ancestor, kept with the idea of pre-cooking a magnificent stew on Friday and keeping it hot on Shabbos. There's all sorts of halachic quibbles I could make with this. I'm not going to quibble. Seriously, cholent as a word is apparently a French word. The word cholent. And we see that in a very old Ashkenazi halachic work from the late 12th century called the Or Zarua. The Or Zarua lived in Vienna. And we're going to talk about the halachic questions of making cholent. And we'll start with this Or Zarua, and we'll think backwards and forwards in time. And with the Or Zarua writes, V'iti b'tzafat beit mori Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Yitzchak. I was in France, in the home of my teacher, Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Yitzchak. Now you got to think about this, the ways that they used to cook, and this is really important to understand, the whole point of cholent. People cooked over a fire, right? You can't make the fires any bigger or stronger on Shabbos. And there was my father told me to say that in Poland, in the same thing, in the beginning of the 20th century. How do you keep your food hot? You had to heat, there was a big oven. The baker had a big oven. And before Shabbos, he would build a really strong fire in the oven. And everybody in town would bring their pots to the oven. The baker would shut the door and seal it. And you hope that Shabbos morning that the baker got the fire right, in the sense that the fire was too hot, everybody's cholent would burn. If the fire went out, everybody's cholent was cold, because you can't deal with the fire on Shabbos. It was a big problem. It was a very, very big problem. It's been solved these days. We have ovens with thermostats, which we'll get to. But in the times of the Or Zarua, who was in the late 12th century until the early 20th century, how are you keeping your food hot? Okay, so the Or Zarua says he went to the home of his teacher, Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Yitzchak. Sometimes the cholent was getting cold. Okay, and in Talmud Shabbos term Esa Ochel. So what do? If the cholent's getting cold, you have non-Jewish friends or neighbors or servants, and they would build up the fire. And there's a whole question on Shabbos about getting benefit from work done for you by a non-Jew. I mean, technically you might think it works, but Chazal frown on it. Then what happened? And some people, they would move it, the non-Jewish people, because you can't put a pot of food next to a fire on Shabbos. So the non-Jewish helpers, they would move the pot to a better place next to a fire. How can you do this? How am I getting benefit from a non-Jew's work? Well, Mefarshim, Heter, his teacher said it is permitted. There's no reason to say this is forbidden. Probably the contents of the pot are still hot. It's close to this critical heat that's called Yad Soledet, scaldingly hot. And there's another rule in Shabbos, that once something is cooked, it's cooked. The cholent was probably cooked adequately on early Shabbos morning before the fire started going out. So to warm it up, to have a non-Jew move it to a hotter place in the fireplace, it's not really an issue of cooking. Another issue. Well, your non-Jewish home helpers, well, they also want to eat the cholent. So obviously, when they move the cholent, they're also moving it for themselves. Okay? And if we get some benefit from it, that's okay. And there, and to say, well, maybe they're not going to eat the cholent, I can say on behalf of the Jewish homeowner, they don't want the non-Jews moving the pot. Okay? Because the Jews know that it's forbidden to reheat on Shabbos cold food. And to say that what the non-Jew moves the pot makes the food not kosher because he heated it on Shabbos, they can't do that. When there are weddings in town and all the people getting together for Shabbos after the wedding, it's common that they make big pots of cholent and they have non-Jewish helpers watching the kitchen, and they're moving the cholent pots closer to the fire. And no one is refraining from eating this food. So Rabbeinu Tam is that song, the great authority, Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam said this is mutter. But the Orzur concludes, it's not appropriate Shabbos behavior. People shouldn't do this. In other words, you put up your cholent pot, you hope for the best. As they did in my father's town in Poland about 100 years ago. You hope for the best. You hope that the baker got the oven just right, hot but not too hot, hot and not cold. So to have hot food on Shabbos wasn't a simple thing. But why was it important to have, first of all, it's good to have warm food. But why was it important? What was like the ideological motive to make sure that everybody has hot food on Shabbat morning? And the idea is found in the earlier book. It's called Sefer Itim. So it's not a famous, he's an important Rishon. He's quoted very, very respectfully. And we know, most of you that we know his works from how it's quoted in the Beit Yosef. His name, here's a Wikipedia of Rabbi Yehuda ben Barcelona. Here's Rabbi Yehuda from Barcelona. He was at the end of the 11th century. So he's earlier than the Or Zarua. And this is what he has to say, okay, and about eating hot food on Shabbat. So let's open him up again. Sefer Ha'etim. Hatmanas Chamin. There's bishul, which is cooking. Hatmana means wrapping up. Because again, you can't put food on the fire on Shabbat. What you have to do is cook your food before Shabbat and insulate it very well. You wrap it up, and that's called hatmana, so it doesn't lose its heat. Hatmanas chamin takana gedolahi, to wrap up the hot food. See, he's a Sephardi. He doesn't use the word cholent. Okay, just like to point out just the linguistic thing. The Or Zarua talks about cholent. He actually uses that word, cholent. I'll put an arrow over there in case you didn't notice that. He talks about cholent. He ate cholent. I ate cholent growing up. But the real Barcelona, he grew up, he's from Spain. He doesn't talk about cholent. He just talks about the generic, I shouldn't call it generic word, chamin, hot food. That's what we saw in that Sephardi site, the chamin. To wrap up the chamin, the kana gedolahi, this is an important enactment. See, it's not just, okay, it's nice to have hot food. Everyone wants to have hot food. No, it's a takana. This is an enactment. Everybody has to have either cholent or chamin. Why? The kino mishum onek Shabbos. Shabbos is a day of Krasel Shabbos. Oh, we saw last week we talked about Shabbos candles. You have to light in the house. You should have a warm meal for Shabbat lunch. During the week, you come home, you want a warm dinner. Certainly on Shabbos, you should have the same thing. So how can I have warm food on Shabbos? I can't put the food on the fire. So Chazal made an enactment. It's not just, it seems like a good idea. This is a takana, he says, that you have to cook something up Friday afternoon, get it nice and hot, and wrap it up really well so it'll be warm Shabbos morning. Yecham b'Shabbos. So you can put milsa onek Shabbos. Who was against this? In the 11th century, from the time going back to who knows when, the 6th century, there were Karaites. And they were a seriously divisive sect of Jews who rejected Chazal's interpretation of the Torah. And it says in the Torah, Lo tavor eish b'chol mashrutecha miyam Shabbat. Parshat Vayakhel. And they took that to mean that there cannot be a fire burning in the home on Shabbat. Not that you can't start a fire. There can't be any fire burning on Shabbat. And that's what he says, that he calls them chitzonim. They're a sect. Their dwellings should be destroyed. Their bones should decay. The Karaites are teaching everyone you can't have hot food on Shabbat because you can't have a fire going in your house on Shabbat. No hot food on Shabbat. They should all disintegrate. That's it. So you go back to our picture of the fireplace. I can have the fire in the fireplace going on Shabbat. There's nothing wrong with that. Well, not the crock pot. I want the fireplace. There's nothing wrong with this picture. But you have two dilemmas. One dilemma is what happens if the fire goes out too early. That's what the Or Zarua mentioned. He saw in the tome of his teacher that they had non-Jewish helpers who would watch the fire on Shabbat for them. The other issue, it was hard for me to get a good picture of this, but imagine, okay, this pot is obviously sitting on hanging from a hook over the flames. But if I want to keep the pot very, very warm, on Friday afternoon before Shabbat, I would let the fire go out, but I would have a lot of coals in that oven, and the pot would be sitting on the hot coals. That is fine as things go, but you're going to have a problem when you pick the pot up, because if you've ever done a barbecue with charcoal, you'll know that if you move the coals sometimes, the coals that look like they went out, they'll ignite. They're exposed to air. Big problem. Moving a pot off of coals is very problematic on Shabbat. And people shouldn't be, the most of the Rishonim agree that the pot should be sitting on some sort of iron ring, either hanging from the top or sitting on a ring just above the coals, so you could move the pot without touching the coals. And the real Bartzoni says, yes, you're right, we have to have Chamin on Shabbat, but it has to be planned. The whole oven has to be planned, that there's no Isser, okay? So again, there's nothing wrong with putting up a pot of hot food and leaving it on top of coals on Shabbat, except for the problem. That's why Chazal said you shouldn't do that. The problem being, you might move the coals or stir the coals deliberately out of habit. But per se, there's nothing at all troublesome about leaving hot food over a fire on Shabbat. Hilkach, therefore, whoever is not eating chamin or cholent on Shabbat, I suspect them of being heretics, and they should be excommunicated, because that is the way of the heretics who don't eat hot food on Shabbat. He should be removed from the Jewish people. Jews eat warm food on Shabbat morning, period. That's all the Sefer Itim has to say. And if you see someone who's not eating hot food Shabbat morning, he's probably a Karaite. But don't be so fast that maybe he's sick. He doesn't feel good. He's not in the mood for cholent. It's too heavy. Okay? Maybe he's not eating hot food because he doesn't, okay? His stomach is upset. He doesn't like cholent. There are people who don't like cholent. I've met Jews who don't like cholent. Some of them are very close family friends and family. They prefer schnitzel, chicken cutlets on Shabbat morning. I know even relatives who eat lasagna Shabbat morning. They eat dairy food, which is something I never heard of growing up in Brooklyn. To eat milchiks on Shabbos morning. It's like, I never saw it. But, you get older, you meet new types of people. There might be someone who doesn't like cholent. So don't excommunicate somebody. Don't be so quick to excommunicate. It's not that he's a heretic and he doesn't like cholent. He doesn't like cholent. So you can't say, no, you must eat cholent. Don't rebuke them for not eating cholent. Okay? You know what? It's better to have something hot on Shabbat. So maybe somehow he doesn't bring up drinking tea and coffee. Maybe they didn't like it. Because you would think that the whole issue is just having something hot. I know most people need hot coffee in the morning. So apparently that wasn't the case in 11th century Barcelona. Have something hot. And as far as the Sefer Itim, you should have a hot meal on Shabbat. Okay, so again, you go back to this fireplace, and we'll see the Russian in a minute, how they keep their food hot. This is actually very good. Some reason the Rishonim don't talk about it. I don't know why not. Somehow they didn't, in those days, didn't have an oven with a hook hanging from the top. Rather, they would have an iron ring on the floor of the oven. But some people are leaving the cholent pot in the hot coals. That's a problem, because how are you going to move the pot without moving the coals? People placing coals beneath the pot. He says, it seems my humble opinion, this is not a good idea. Okay? And he'll explain to why not. Okay, so that's cholent. And the last opinion we'll see about the cholent is from the Rosh. The Rosh is about, let's say, 150 to 200 years after the Sefer Itim in the Or Zarua. He was the last of the Tosfot in Germany. His teacher, Murray Ruttenberg, was locked up in a dungeon in Germany. He ran away from Germany. He made it to Spain. And again, he also has a problem with how are people keeping the food warm without getting involved with coals, because that's a big problem. I want the food to be hot. Coals stay hot for a very long time. You wrap up the pot in coals, seal it in an oven. It's pretty well insulated. Your food will be warm Shabbos morning. But you have to get it off of the coals. And it's a big issue. And there's another issue. Oh, let us have any questions.
I was not even
any questions?
looking at it. Okay, so you should do that now. I don't know whether or not they speak Hebrew, English. One of my agents spoke with them. Yosef spoke with them. And he usually speaks in Hebrew, so I don't know. But you said you have someone there who can speak in Hebrew, right?
I don't know who you're talking to, Messiferman, but you're talking to us now.
Sure.
Okay, so I'll say again. Are there any questions?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. So to see the big issue in keeping food warm, and why I would want to keep food warm on Shabbat, like the Sefer Jim says, it's Oneg Shabbos. There's the Gemara and in the Sechet Shabbat, and it talks about how they kept it. How do you set up your food in the oven before Shabbat? It's a Mishnah, and their ovens obviously were not with thermostats and heating elements or gas. You built up a fire inside of a box, which is an oven, and you'd watch it. During the week, you watch it, you add some coals, take out some coals. What are you going to do on Shabbos? You can't do any of these things. So the Mishnah says, this is the third Pesach Perek in Shabbos, Kira is an oven. These days, Kira is a gas range in Hebrew. In the Mishnah's time, it was the oven. It was a type of oven. Okay, so what's the fuel? If you fueled your oven with straw, that's kashin gavava, well, straw doesn't leave coals. It burns up. So then you can put your pot on top of the kira, and there's no problem or concern that you'll stir coals because there aren't any coals. Be careful to bait some Now, let's say I used wood. I can build a fire with wood, but I'm going to have hot ashes and hot coals. I can't put my food on top of that oven, chiyigrov or chitin as an afer, unless you rake the coals aside or cover them with ash. And when you cover, because Chazal's, their concern was these days, if I look at my soup or on the top of the stove, if it's not cooking, I can turn a knob and make it hotter. You can turn the knob the other way, lower the flame. Same thing is true for the oven with a thermostat. In those days, you'd look in your oven. If things aren't going the way you like, you'd poke the coals and move them around a little bit, and the fire will start up again. And that's a habit. That's a habit that people have. And therefore, if there are coals in the oven, either rake them aside or cover them with ashes. When I look in the oven, I say, oh, it's Shabbos, and he won't touch it. And the Gemara asks, when it says lo yitain, don't put a pot on top of this oven. Okay, just bear with me, please. What does it mean, don't place the pot on top of the oven? Ibaya lahu. Hai lo yitain lo yachzir. Does this mean that I cooked the food and I had some food, I tasted, I ate something. All I want to do is put it back. Because putting it back is a problem because it looks like you're cooking. You put a pot on the stove, it doesn't look nice. It doesn't give it a good impression. But I'm talking about Friday afternoon, then maybe I can just leave it there until Shabbos morning. And I'm not worried about how about appearance is. I'm not worried about stirring up coals. And that would be the opinion of a Tana called Hananya. And he has a famous idea. Machal ben Drusai, there was a famous robber called Ben Drusai, and he was always on the run from the police, and he would eat food that was only 1/3 cooked. As long as your food is 1/3 cooked, it's edible, and then I can leave it on top of the stove on Shabbos, even if the oven hasn't been cleared out from coals. That's one way to look at the Mishnah. Oh, Dilma, I have another way to look at the Mishnah. Lahashaus Tanan, I can't even leave anything on top of the stove unless all the coals are raked out. Because I'm afraid that out of habit, you'll stir the coals. Hananya is lenient, the Chachamim are ruled strictly, and the Rosh, who comes to summarize halacha, he says, I got to tell you what to do. Bishil Shirabu Deos by Pisco, a lot of opinions. Some people say the halacha is like Hananya. I can always leave my food as long as it's 1/3 cooked on top of my stove on Shabbos, even though I want my oven, even though my oven is full of coals. I hold like Hananya. Okay? Yisrael adukim b'mitzvahs onek Shabbos v'ol yishmeu lahachmir. The Rosh himself would prefer that you held like Chamin, and you wouldn't use an oven unless the coals are raked out. Why does he say? The Jewish people love mitzvot. They love the mitzvah of Onek Shabbos. And if you're going to tell them to be machmir like the Chachamim, no one's going to listen. Because again, if you don't know like Hananya, and that the oven was cleared out from coals, it's not going to be easy to keep the food hot until Shabbos morning. This is a minhag. This isn't just something frivolous by eating cholent on Shabbos. It's a minhag. And we saw what the Ramah said about minhagim, right? And the vatal shum minhag. Don't nullify any minhag. Lo lilo galav, lo lachinamugla. Don't mock them, because they're not there for no reason. There's a mitzvah of Onek Shabbos. Onek Shabbos means warm, hot food, at least warm food Shabbat morning. And how are you going to keep the food warm in the oven if there aren't any coals in the oven? So the Rosh says, you know what? Leave the Jewish people alone. They have a minhag. Al pi poskim k'Hananya. There are people who hold like Hananya. He's in the Gemara. He's a Tana. He says you can leave a pot on top of the oven even if the coals are in the oven. The coals are okay. We're going to talk about that hatmana word in a few minutes. It's not that the pot is wrapped up in coals, because then it's going to be very hard to move the pot away from the coals. Rather, kisei shel barzel v'kter yoshevet aleha tluya ba'avanim. That's it. So you don't have the pot sitting on coals, because then halachically it would be just usher to move the pot, because of necessity the coals will light up again. You have an iron stand inside the oven. The pot is sitting on this kisei shel barzel, or it's hanging like in that picture I showed you, that the pot is not in contact with the coals. But to put the pot on top of the coals is usher. Why? the account. Man b'davar mosif hevel us afil mil od yom, because coals add heat, and we may put the pot on top of the heat source, but you cannot submerge the pot into the heat source. That's hatmana b'davar mosif hevel. That's asur rabbanan. So that's cholent. Hold on, I have my daughter's getting married because I'm getting some phone calls now. Just 1 minute. Just let me take this phone call. Menachem, I'm giving a class now. Okay, call me in half an hour. Okay, bye-bye. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. My daughter's getting married next week, so I'm getting a lot of phone calls. Okay, so that's it. That's hatmana. That's cholent, and that's the minhag of eating cholent. It's a matter of Oneg Shabbos, which is something in its own right that's very, very significant. And second, it's like Sefer Itim said, well, who's not eating cholent? Karaites don't eat cholent, because Karaites are against eating hot food on Shabbos. So it sort of became a matter of identity. If people eat cholent on Shabbos are good Jews. People who don't eat cholent on Shabbos, you gotta look into their reasoning. If they're sick, it's one thing. But if they refuse to have any cholent at all, you gotta wonder about them. Are they Karaites? So that's cholent. And just to show you how serious cholent is, I'll just finish up with this. First, let's give any questions. Any questions?
No.
No. Is that good that there are no questions?
It's very clear.
Yes.
Okay. About 25 years ago, there was looks like in the times of the Rush and the Or Zarua and the Sefer Itim, how are you going to keep the food hot without manipulating coals? They got into this halacha called hatmana, about submerging. The food has to be submerged in something that insulates it, preserves the heat, but you can't submerge the pot into coals because that's called mosif hevel. About 25 years ago, give or take, there was a whole thing. Some of you may remember it. You may know about it. About crock pots. People in America, it's like, how do you keep your food hot in America? When I was a little kid, well, most apartments had a gas range, and you cooked up your cholent, and you made a low flame on top of the stove, and just like in the days of Chazal, they were worried that you're going to stir the coals if you could see the flame. We would cover the flame with a piece of tin, and a piece of tin in Yiddish is called a blech. And the blech would cover the flame and it covered the knobs of the stove. And this way, you wouldn't, out of habit, adjust the flame on top of your stove, and your cholent would be hot. The problem is it makes the kitchen very, very hot because you have a flame going for 26 hours in the kitchen. So somebody invented the crock pot. It's an electric pot. Has no, okay, this is a digital one, but the old one has a knob to just, it goes low heat, high heat. And this pot has a heating element at the bottom and in the walls. Is this considered submerging food in something that's adding heat? And in America, people use crock pots. It's about 25 years ago, right before Rosh Hashanah was nifter, someone asked him about crock pots. And he said you can't use them on Shabbat, and then he passed away, unfortunately. So he didn't get an answer. Why is it usher? And then people wondered. A lot of people threw out their crock pots. I was told that one of his sons-in-law published the last Shuva about the crock pots, I was told that day you could drive around Harnov and get 100 crock pots just lying on the street. Because people just threw out the crock pots because Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said they're usher. His great student was Rav Neuwirth Zatzal, wrote Shmirat Shabbat Kihilchata. And what does he say about crock pots? This was a big issue. Crock pot, this slow cooker, crock pot. It's a clay pot which is inserted into a metal pot which has the heating elements. And people, I'm not getting into the laws of Bishul and Shabbos, people just dump all the ingredients of the cholent into the crock pot, turn it on to low, cover the knob with a piece of Scotch tape because you shouldn't be able to see the knob, and you go. Now, there are doubts regarding the permissibility of this crock pot to be used on Shabbat, primarily because of hatmana, because the pot is immersed in a source of heat. That's hatmana, and it's adding heat. That sounds like exactly what Chazal forbade. Hatmana b'davar mosif hevel. Well, Neuwirth Zatzal says he doesn't tell you that it's asur. Ask your competent local rabbi, is it appropriate to use a crock pot on Shabbos? And he writes a footnote, okay? And I asked my teacher, about crock pots. As its operation was explained to him, not the le'esor. He was inclined to say that it's asur. So he asked me to clarify this matter. It's true. I actually wrote him a very long essay on the subject. I brought it to him when he was dying in the hospital. And because in the multiple of our sins, our teacher was taken away from us. And I have no one to talk to. Now, I Michas Shama Tinina look in his response to Michas Shama, Sefer Otzos Shabbos, Das Poskim about this. Vami Lagon V'Shabbos Sefer Shama Yashiv Shlita. So Rabbi Yashiv famously said, okay, if you're worried about being submerged in this heat source, put a few pebbles into the bottom of the crock pot. That will lift the crock pot up from away the heat elements that are at the bottom of the crock pot, and then you don't have atmana anymore. That was his suggestion. And there was another suggestion from another of the great poskim of the time, who was Rav Vosner Zatzal. And he was also asked about crock pots. I'm just bringing this up to show you, just like 1,000 years ago, there were questions about how to keep the food warm on Shabbos. There is now a question about how to keep your food warm on Shabbos. May I use a crock pot? So this is what Rav Vosner wrote. Okay. I received your letter. Okay. Slow cooker should clear electronic. You asked me about can I use the slow cooker, which is an electric device used for cooking. And in America, a lot of Jews are using crock pots on Shabbos. And also in Eretz Yisrael, people use this to keep their cholent warm. The pot has two components. The ceramic insert, the electric on the outside, which has the heating elements. Okay. It seems to me that the crock pot, and you go back to the picture, indeed, the food is immersed in this the ceramic container, which is inserted into the electric container, which contains heating elements. So I have submerged food in something that's adding heat. And the Gemara says specifically that's usher. Atmana b'davar mosif hevel is usher. So why are all these frum Jews using crock pots for their cholent? Okay, it's a very reasonable question. All right, why? So he says, you're right. It depends how submerged is submerged. What does hatmana mean? If I say submerged means merely inserted, then the crock pot is usher, and that would be the impression, that would be the psak of the Machaber. He says hatmana is to insert. But he says, he can be baili das Ramah. But I want to know we're Ashkenazim. What would the Ramah say? Because apparently from the Ramah, you get the impression that not only must the pot be surrounded, but also be insulated from on top. And if anybody has ever used a crock pot, I imagine many of you have used a crock pot. Look at the crock pot. The glass cover is not an insulator. It gets hot. You get condensation on it. There's a heating element, yes. But the food is not covered by an insulator. It's covered by this piece of glass. Glass is not an insulator. So to sum it all up, Rav Vosner said, I don't think this is hatmana according to the Ramah. Therefore, I will not say that it's usher for an Ashkenazi Jew to keep their cholent in a crock pot on Shabbos. Because as far as he is concerned from the Ramah, it's not hatmana. Okay? Imki Yafeh, your quote, Terasam Mishon Rabbeinu Tam, Sefer Yasher, Hatmana Asura Kishamos, Mutmana Ruba Ukulo. You're right. There are Rishonim who say, like Rabbeinu Tam and the Machaber, that if most of the container of food is surrounded by a source of heat, that is the forbidden hatmana. That's true. But Ein Zedas Ramah Klal. It's not the Ramah does not agree with that opinion. He thinks the Ramah holds that hatmana means from a surrounding, from around, and from the bottom and at the top. And the crock pot is not insulated at the top. And Rav Vosner concludes, okay, Balkain Omar Betach Whoever wants to be machmir can be machmir. Don't want to use a crock pot? Fine. Don't use a crock pot. Like your uncle Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach held. You can't use a crock pot on Shabbos. Well, but to say that people who are using crock pots are wrong, that's not right. To say that, well, this is a new thing, maybe even Ramah would answer it. I don't know. And you worry about shehiyah, there are ways to manage shehiyah. Make sure your food is machal ben rusai. So that's it. Chulent was a source of question 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago. The Karaites said no to Chulent. The Sefer Itim says about 1,000 years ago, if a Jew doesn't want to eat cholent on Shabbos, I think they're Karaites. And you have to examine them. Make sure they're not, maybe they have a doctor's note that they can't eat cholent or chamin. He called it chamin. But otherwise, you ought to be eating chamin or cholent. Or if you want to eat milchiks and eat a lasagna that you kept on the blech. But you have to have something warm on Shabbos. And in our time, there was an argument about crock pots. Any questions?
Yeah.
What?
I was wondering about a hot manna made with a blanket. You put the pot in the blanket and wrap it around and keep that like that.
That's fine because the blanket doesn't create heat. The crock pot issue is that it creates heat. Like charcoal creates heat. Blankets are just insulators. That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Probably when using the crock pot.
Thank you, Rabbi. Mazal tov on the chasana.
Thank you.
That I was told to put a layer of aluminum foil in. In other words, like I would put on a black aluminum foil, to put aluminum foil on the inside of and then put the pot, the crock pot in, so that the aluminum works like putting it on top of a blech. So that's
not so much the blech. It raises the crock pot away from the heating element. The point of the blech is to cover anything that can adjust the heat. So you have to cover the knobs of the crock pot.
You cover the knobs, but I was told in addition to.
That's it, because now you're removing it from the heating element. That's what WebYeshiva said. Put in a few pebbles.
Right. The best thing to do is
that's why it's not. But that won't be hatmana. It's not in the heating element.
Right. The best thing to do is to have a teimani in your family. They could take anything cold out of the refrigerator and put it onto the blech. Hot food on Shabbos.
Problems of a meal. Okay. All right. There's one. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mazel Tov.
Thank you. Okay, we have a minute for one more traditional Jewish food. I wanted to talk about this because it's actually very interesting. Where did it go? Here we go. Latkes. Yeah, Jews eat latkes on Hanukkah.
Yeah.
Okay. Why are we eating latkes on Hanukkah? Okay, because what the interesting thing is, it's not at least we saw cholent is discussed by Rishonim that you have to eat something warm on Shabbos, Chamin, cholent. But you go back to this. How did latkes become Jewish? It's like you hate being like a bubble buster, but potatoes were unknown in Europe until they were brought back from the Western Hemisphere in the 16th century. So in the times of the Ramah and all the other great Ashkenazim, there were no latkes. And Mr. Gunnar says because of oil. That is a reason that some people give. And it's an interesting question because if you look in Shulchan Aruch, what does Ramah say to eat on Hanukkah? And this kind of I think latkes just like shoved them aside. Because you look at the Ramah, eat cheese on. Now people eat cheese on Shavuos. Shavuos became the milchik holiday. The Ramah says no. Hanukkah is the milchik holiday. Why? Yehuda says, "Oh yeah." There's an apocryphal story about a certain Yehudit, Judith, who, just like the story of Yael and Sefer Shoftim, how she kills Sisera. Sisera comes running into her tent. He says, "Give me something to drink." She gives him some warm milk. He takes a nap, and she takes a hammer and bangs a spike into his head. There's a story of Yehudit. She kills a Greek general called Holofernes, and she chops off his head. After she gets him to get thirsty, eat some cheese, drink some milk, and go to sleep. So Ramah says, eat cheese on Hanukkah. And I don't know anyone who makes the point of eating cheese on Hanukkah, because people eat latkes on Hanukkah, or in Israel they eat sufganiyot. So what happened? So there's a sefer found called Achil B'Halel, joyous eating. I found this on. There are amazing things in this website, in this database called Otzar Chochmah. So what do? What should you be eating on Hanukkah? Latkes, okay. Yeah, okay. Puri says it could be because of the oil. Mr. Bruno pointed out the oil. Is it the oil of that you're commemorating the oil of the menorah, or is it Pirsum Hanes? And he has this whole discussion. It's just interesting that people think about these things. So what do? I only have money for X. I have a budget. I have a food budget. Buy latkes or buy cheese. Okay? What comes first? He discusses that. He says, I think it could be everyone should, if you have a choice of cheese or latkes, eat latkes. The that became the dominant custom. People eat sufganiyot, which are deep fried in oil. People eat latkes, which are fried in oil. No one's really making a point of eating cheese. Okay? So he says, the Chayyim says, the Chayyim's time, there were already potatoes. Some people are still eating cheese. Okay? And he says that a few people, same thing, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, he says, Medaktikin, but most people are eating latkes on Chanukah. That became the Ramaz minig of cheese was kind of set aside in favor of eating latkes or sufganiyot in Israel. So that's it for food. Like I said, next week I'm not going to be able to meet with you. B'ezras my daughter's getting married. So say goodbye to you now. And remember that we should all eat cholent on Shabbos. That's what the Sefer Itim says. That's what the Arzarua says. And if a person does want to eat cholent on Shabbos, I suspect them of being heretics. That's what the Sefer Itim says. Whoever doesn't eat cholent on Shabbos, examine them, or at least get a doctor's note. Okay, bye-bye.
You know what you could have? You could have cheese latkes on Hanukkah.
Oh, please. Okay. So bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.